The Girl He Came Home For. Part 1. The World Before It Broke. The parking lot of Haven Ridge High School sat quiet at 11:42 on a Tuesday morning in October. Most of the cars belonged to teachers. A few belonged to seniors who had earned the privilege of driving themselves to school and still weren't entirely sure what to do with it. The lot was arranged in neat rows between two aging oak trees that had been there longer than the school itself, their roots slowly lifting the asphalt at the edges, cracking it in long, uneven lines that nobody had gotten around to fixing yet. A rental car sat in the far corner, dark gray, Virginia plates, still running. The man behind the wheel had not moved in 4 minutes. He was in his mid-20s, though. Something about the way he held himself made him look older. His uniform was pressed and decorated, but there was dust on his boots that hadn't been there when he left the base. His jaw was set. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but were not gripping it, the stillness of a man who had learned the hard way that gripping things too tightly before you needed to was a waste of energy. He was looking at his phone. The screen showed a video, 47 seconds long. He pressed play. He watched it through to the end without blinking. Then he set the phone face down on the passenger seat. He sat for another 30 seconds. He turned off the engine. He got out of the car. His name was Marcus Novak. He was a United States Marine currently assigned to a rifle company at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, currently not where he was supposed to be, currently not thinking about that at all. He walked toward the front entrance of the school. He had walked into buildings where people were shooting at him. He had never been this angry. 3 miles away on Delwood Street, the alarm on Clara Novak's phone went off at 5:31 in the morning. Not because she had set it for 5:31. She had set it for 6 o'clock. But something about the October air, something about the angle of light coming through the curtain, something she would not have been able to name if you asked her, woke her up before it rang. It always did. Her body had learned long ago that the morning required extra time, and so it started preparing before she asked it to. She lay still for a moment looking at the ceiling. The ceiling of her bedroom had a water stain in the far corner from a leak 3 winters ago that her father had patched but never fully repaired. She had looked at that stain so many mornings that she had stopped seeing it. It was just part of the room now, part of the ritual. On the nightstand beside her, a glass of water. Her phone, a paperback novel with a cracked spine and a photograph in a plain wooden frame. The photograph showed a young man in dress uniform, standing very straight, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile but wasn't not a smile either. Underneath the frame, written in her own handwriting on a small strip of masking tape, E. Novak. Proud as always. She reached over and touched the edge of the frame before she did anything else. Then she began the process of getting up. People who have never spent a day in a wheelchair tend to imagine mornings as the same for everyone. Alarm feed on floor, bathroom, coffee done. It is a small and forgivable failure of imagination. The truth is that for Clara Novak, the first 45 minutes of every day were a negotiation between her body and her intentions, between what she needed to do and how long everything actually took. She had gotten very good at this negotiation over 16 years. She had learned which parts of the routine could be shortened and which ones could not. She had learned how to lay her clothes out the night before so that the morning moved more smoothly. She had learned how to ask for help when her father was home and how to manage entirely on her own when he wasn't. He wasn't home this morning. He worked the overnight shift at a freight depot 20 minutes north. He did this 5 days a week, had done it for 4 years since the manufacturing plant closed, and this was what was available. He left at 10 in the evening and returned at 7 in the morning, and on days when Clara's schedule started early, they passed each other at the door. Him coming in tired her going out and exchanged whatever could be exchanged in 40 seconds before one of them had to keep moving. She didn't begrudge him the hours. She understood the math of it, what the house cost, what the modified van cost, what the medical visits cost, what the replacement parts for the chair cost. The math was not complicated. It was just relentless. By 6:14, she was dressed, had eaten half a bowl of cereal at the kitchen counter, and had read the 3 most recent comments on her blog. The blog had no name attached to it. Just an address, flori.net. She had started it 2 years ago, not because she thought anyone would read it, but because she needed somewhere to put the thoughts that didn't have anywhere else to go. The thoughts about what it was like to move through a world that had been built without you in mind. The thoughts about what people's eyes did when they saw the wheelchair first. The thoughts about the specific complicated exhaustion of being seen as only one thing. 12,000 people followed it now. She had never told anyone at school. Something about the separation felt necessary. The blog was the place where she was completely honest. School was the place where she had learned to be very, very careful. She closed the app, finished her orange juice, put on her jacket, and rolled out to the van. Haven Ridge High School had been built in 1987 and renovated in 2009, and the renovation had never quite finished the job of making it feel new. The hallways were wide enough to meet accessibility codes, but not wide enough to feel comfortable in a wheelchair when the morning crowd was moving. The cafeteria smelled of industrial cleaner and something fried. The gymnasium floor was good refinished every 2 years, and the athletic program made sure everyone knew it. The athletic program was the pride of Haven Ridge, football specifically. The Haven Ridge Hawks had won 3 district championships in the last 8 years, and the trophy case near the main entrance was arranged with the specific reverence of a place of worship. Photographs of teams, photographs of coaches, photographs of players who had gone on to college programs with scholarship money attached. The most recent photograph, added just last spring, showed a 17-year-old named Brent Holler holding a trophy above his head, grinning wide enough to show every tooth while his teammates carried him on their shoulders. He was tall, 6'2", broad through the shoulders, with the kind of build that suggested he had been working toward it since he was old enough to hold a weight. His hair was cut short on the sides and longer on top, the way every player on the team wore it, a small act of collective identity that Brent had started and the others had followed. He was handsome in an uncomplicated way that people are handsome when they have never had to think very hard about whether they are. His father was Conrad Holler. Conrad Holler had made a significant amount of money in commercial real estate over the course of 20 years, and he had decided some years back that the most efficient way to secure his son's future was to attach the Holler name to the institutions that controlled that future. He had funded the new athletic training facility. His name was on the building in 4-foot letters. He sat on the school's advisory board. He attended games in the front row and shook hands with the coaching staff afterward, with the ease of a man who had learned that the people you needed were always more comfortable when they believed the relationship was mutual. Principal Whitmore knew exactly what the Holler name meant to the school's renovation fund. He had never said so out loud. He didn't need to. Brent moved through the school the way certain people move through certain spaces, as if the space had been arranged with him in mind. Hallways cleared slightly in his direction. Conversations paused when he passed. He was not cruel about this most of the time. He had simply learned that the world responded to his presence in a particular way, and he had stopped questioning it. Mr. Calloway's room, American Literature 3rd period, was on the 2nd floor. The elevator worked 80% of the time. Today was in the 80%. Clara settled into her place at the end of the front row where the desk had been removed to leave space for the wheelchair, and opened her annotated copy of the novel they were working through. Mr. Calloway was a man in his mid-50s who had been teaching at Haven Ridge for 19 years. He was not a bad teacher. He was the kind of teacher who had once been excellent and had settled gradually and without quite noticing into competent. He still cared about books, but he had also learned over 19 years how to read the institution he worked within, what it rewarded and what it did not, whose names appeared in the donor list that circulated before budget meetings. He was a careful man, careful in the way that people become when they have something they cannot afford to lose. When Clara settled into her place, he nodded at her and continued writing the day's agenda on the board. He did not ask how her morning had been. Through the window to his left, a clear view of the main hallway below, where the corridor bent toward the gymnasium. He looked through it once, then away. Clara noticed the quality of that not looking, the specific deliberateness of it, and filed it away without comment. She would understand what it meant later. The cafeteria at Haven Ridge High held approximately 300 students across 3 lunch periods. The second lunch period, Clara's, ran from 11:15 to 11:55, and in those 40 minutes the room sorted itself with the efficiency of a system that had been running long enough to seem natural. The football players occupied the 4 tables nearest the windows that faced the practice field. Brent Holler's group anchored the nearest table, and the outer tables filled with players of diminishing importance orbiting the center. The honors students gathered near the back wall, the art students, the band students, the students who didn't fit cleanly anywhere. These groups occupied the middle territory, the negotiated space, the benches closest to the food line, where the social overhead was lowest. And then there was the corner near the east-facing window, partly blocked by a support column, just far enough from everything to be easy to overlook. That was Clara's corner. She did not consider it a defeat. She had thought about it carefully years ago, and decided that a corner where no one bothered her was preferable to a table where she had to manage the performance of belonging. She had her book, she had her food, she had 40 minutes of quiet before the afternoon started. She rolled in with her tray of pasta, a roll orange slices she always took, even though she never finished them, and made her way toward the column. She had almost reached it when she heard his voice. It is worth pausing here to say something about the specific taxonomy of cruelty. There is the cruelty that comes from hatred, rare and usually easy to name. There is the cruelty that comes from fear, more common and more complicated. And there is the cruelty that comes from boredom, mixed with a small measure of power and a large measure of having never once been required to imagine what it feels like to be someone else. This last kind is the most ordinary. It is also the one that does the most damage. Brent Holler was not having a particularly good day. A chemistry exam had come back lower than expected, which meant a conversation with his father he was already dreading, which meant that the edge he carried into the cafeteria that Tuesday was sharper than usual and needed somewhere to land. What he said was not clever. What it was loud. Loud enough for the tables nearby to hear, loud enough for heads to turn. He referenced the wheelchair. He made a joke of the kind that requires the subject of it to be something less than fully present, not quite a person, just a prop for the performance. His friends laughed. Clara did not stop moving. She had learned long ago through a kind of conditioning. She was still not entirely finished grieving that stopping was worse. Stopping meant engaging. Engaging meant escalating. Escalating meant that whatever dignity she had walked in with was now a negotiating chip she could not afford to spend. She kept her eyes on the corner. 4 more tables. 3, 2. Then Brent stepped in front of her. Not aggressively. That was the thing about him. He moved into her path the way someone moves when they are confident the space belongs to them and haven't fully considered that someone else might be using it. The effect was the same either way. Her tray caught the edge of his arm. The pasta slid. The orange slices scattered across the table to her left. Someone made a sound, half laugh, half gasp. Brent said something else. The word turbo was involved. His friends found this considerably funnier than it was. Clara's hands were on her wheels. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the orange slices on the table, calculating whether she could reach them without making a further scene, concluding that she could not. She said quietly, please. Just that one word. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out of a place below planning. Brent looked at her for a half second. A real look, the kind that happens before the performance resumes, and then the performance resumed. He put his hand on the armrest of her chair. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. The chair went sideways, then backward, the mechanism giving a sound that was not quite a crack and not quite a snap, but somewhere between the two, and Clara went with it, her hands unable to catch the floor fast enough, her body hitting the cold cafeteria linoleum with a specific horrible completeness. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Then the room erupted, laughter from some, phones from others, a scream from the lunch aide near the serving window that came out as something between stop and help and landed as neither. A chair scraping back somewhere, as Ren Briggs, Clara's only real friend in this building, who had been sitting 12 feet away and had been getting up to intervene since the moment Brent stepped into Clara's path, stood and shoved her way toward the front. Brent shoved her back. Not hard, hard enough. Ren hit the edge of the table. She made a sound that was mostly surprise. Nobody came to help her either. And Clara lay on the floor amid the scattered pieces of her chair and the remains of her lunch, and she did not cry. She looked at the ceiling. The cafeteria ceiling at Haven Ridge High had fluorescent panels, 6 of them visible from where she lay. The third one from the left, flickering in the particular rhythm of a bulb that was almost finished. She focused on that rhythm. She had read once that dissociation was the brain's way of stepping outside a situation that was too large to process in real time. She didn't know if what she was doing was dissociation. She knew that it was the only way she had ever found to get through these moments without falling apart in front of them. The flickering light, the sound of the room, the cold of the floor. She did not cry. Near the window table, Desmond Fitch, a junior from the chess team, slight-framed, sitting where he always sat on Tuesdays, had his phone out. He was not filming for the same reason everyone else was filming. He looked frightened, actually, in the way of someone who didn't know what else to do and had settled on documentation as the only available response. His hands were not entirely steady. The camera caught everything from the beginning, from the moment Brent's voice rose over the cafeteria noise, to the step into Clara's path, to the hand on the armrest. All of it, 47 uninterrupted seconds. He did not know yet what that clip would cost him. The cafeteria doors at the far end of the room opened at 11:42. A man in a marine dress uniform stepped through them. The room quieted the way rooms quiet when something enters that doesn't fit the ordinary register of the space, the way a sound cuts off when the power goes out. Gradually, then all at once. He was not large in a theatrical way. He was not performing anything. He stood in the doorway for perhaps 3 seconds, taking in the room, the overturned chair, the scattered tray. The phone still raised, Brent Holler standing with his arms slightly out from his sides in the posture of someone who had been mid-action, when the music stopped, and then he walked forward. He didn't rush. He walked with the specific measured pace of a man who has learned that controlled movement reads as authority in a way that speed does not. The students near the center tables moved out of the way, not because they were told to, they just did. He reached the space where Clara was lying, and he crouched down, and the first thing he said was quiet enough that only she could hear it. "Hey, kiddo." Clara looked away from the flickering light and looked at her brother's face. She said, "They broke it." He said, "I know." She said, "I didn't do anything." He said, "I know that too." He put his hand on her shoulder, not lifting her, not rushing her, just there, and she closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds in something that had been very tightly wound in her chest since she hit the floor loosened slightly. Then he stood. He did not cross the room to where Brent was standing. He simply turned so that he was facing him. Brent Holler was 17 years old and 6'2", and had not in recent memory encountered a situation he could not manage with a combination of size and social position. He tried to arrange his face into something that communicated that this situation was also manageable. It was not working. Marcus Novak did not raise his voice. This in its own way was the most unsettling thing about him. He said, "You think she's weak?" It was not a question. Brent opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't know who you are, man." "Her brother," Marcus said, "and a United States Marine." A pause. "Men like you," Marcus continued, and his voice was very level, the way water is level before something heavy falls into it, "have a talent for measuring strength against people least able to fight back. I've spent 3 years around people who were genuinely dangerous, and I'll tell you what I know for certain." He looked at Brent without theatrical menace, just a clear and complete attention. "She is harder than you will ever be, and what happened to her on this floor today is going to follow you in ways you cannot currently imagine." He did not move toward Brent. He did not need to. It was at this point that Principal Whitmore arrived, breathing slightly hard, having been called from the office when the lunch aide finally reached a phone and took in the scene and said something about everyone, please remaining calm, and procedures being followed and matters being handled through the appropriate channels. Marcus turned to look at him. Principal Whitmore had been in educational administration for 22 years. He prided himself on his ability to de-escalate. He looked at Marcus Novak's face and did not feel particularly confident. "This will be addressed," Principal Whitmore said. "I can assure you." "Assure me," Marcus said. He said it calmly, 2 words placed very precisely in the air between them, not a request for elaboration, not a statement of confidence. Principal Whitmore said yes, absolutely. He would gather information and be in contact with the family by end of day. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he turned back to Clara. They moved to the hallway outside the main office. A school counselor brought a folding chair. Clara sat very still. The counselor asked several questions that she answered in the shortest, accurate terms available. Marcus stood 2 feet to her left, slightly angled, in the way that people stand when they are being visibly present without being in the way. The school nurse appeared with ice for a bruise on Clara's elbow that neither of them had noticed yet. At some point, the counselor stepped away to take a call. Marcus pulled his chair closer. He said, "How long has this been going on?" Clara looked at the far wall. "A while." He waited. "It's not every day," she said. "It's just a while." He did not say anything immediately. He had learned in the years since he enlisted that the silence after a true statement was often more useful than any response to it. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara looked at him. Something moved across her face that was not quite weariness and not quite love, and was in fact both of them at once. "Because you were overseas," she said. "Because there was nothing you could have done from there. Because," she stopped, "because I was handling it." Marcus said, "You were on the floor." "I know where I was." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who know each other well enough not to need to fill every gap. After a moment, Marcus said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him. "I wasn't supposed to come home," he said. "I didn't have leave. I was scheduled for a training exercise this week starting this morning." Clara went very still. "I got the clip," he said. "Ren sent it to my unit email. I watched it on my phone at 0430, and I was in my car by 0500. Marcus, Article 86, he said, naming it plainly the way he would name any other fact. AWOL, unauthorized absence. If it goes through the formal process, I'm looking at NJP under Article 15, which means possible reduction in rank, pay forfeiture, restriction to the barracks." Clara stared at him. "You could lose your rank." "Yes, you could lose your pay." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. Down the hallway, a class was letting out, and the sound of lockers and footsteps moved past them like weather. Then she said, "Before you got in the car, did you hesitate?" Marcus considered this with what appeared to be genuine thought. "No," he said. She nodded once. She looked down at her hands. What passed between them was something older than gratitude and more complicated than relief, the specific weighted acknowledgement that someone has handed you something irreplaceable, and you have understood the full cost of it. I'm going to be okay, she said. He said, I know. I mean it. I'm going to handle this. He said, I believe you. She looked at him. Something in her face had shifted away from the closed quality it had carried since the cafeteria. She looked like herself, the version of herself that only a few people had access to. You look terrible, she said. Did you sleep at all? On the plane. That doesn't count. It counted enough. The counselor returned. The afternoon began to organize itself around them. Forms, questions, procedures, the institutional machinery of a school trying to process something it was not quite equipped for. But for those few minutes in the hallway with Marcus sitting slightly angled and Clara very still, and the world moving around them without quite touching them, yet something had been spoken and heard and received. What Clara did not know yet, what she would not learn for another 2 days, was that the 47-second clip that had reached Marcus's phone at 04:30 was not the clip that most people were watching. The version that spread across social media that afternoon, 40,000 views before the school day ended and still climbing, started at the 35th second. Everything before that was gone. The approach, the words, the deliberate step into her path, the arm that nudged the tray, the escalation beat by beat from cruelty to violence, all of it removed. What remained showed Clara rolling too fast into a group of students. The collision, the aftermath. It did not show the cause. Somewhere in those 40,000 views, a man who took no pleasure in anonymity watched the numbers climb and felt for one specific and private moment that the problem had been managed. That man's name was Conrad Holler. He had not edited the clip himself. He was a man who made calls and who had learned over a long professional life which calls to make and to whom and how to ensure that the result appeared organic. By the time Principal Whitmore called him that afternoon to inform him that his son faced disciplinary review, Conrad Holler had already spoken to 3 people and already knew with reasonable certainty how that review would go. He thanked the principal for the call. He hung up. He opened his laptop and made a note in the file he kept for things that needed monitoring. He was not a villain in the way that stories sometimes require villains to be, obvious declared with visible malice. He was a man who had learned that the world was a system, that systems had points of leverage, and that the people who understood this were simply more effective than the people who did not. He genuinely believed his son was talented and deserved to be protected. He genuinely believed that the girl in the wheelchair had on some level not handled the situation well. He believed these things in the way that people believe things that are useful to believe. He called Brent to let him know the scholarship was safe. Brent, sitting in the assistant principal's office down the hall from where Clara and Marcus were still talking, answered on the second ring and said very little and hung up first. He sat there with the phone in his hand. Outside the window, past the parking lot, past the 2 oak trees with their cracked roots, the October sky was going the color of old brass. He thought about a girl he had known in 4th grade at the elementary school before his father moved him. A girl who had been in a wheelchair even then, who had a laugh that was too big for the size of her, who had once told him he was 9 years old, she was 9 years old, that the best thing about sitting down all the time was that you never had to worry about falling. He had laughed at that. He had thought it was funny because it was true. He sat there until someone came to tell him what happened next. He did not go back to the cafeteria. He did not call his friends. He sat alone in that small institutional room with its motivational posters and its smell of carpet cleaner, and he thought about a girl's laugh, and he did not feel proud of himself, and that particular feeling was newer and more uncomfortable than almost anything else he had experienced in recent memory. Part 2. The weight of what they know. The phone call came at 8:17 on Wednesday morning. Marcus took it in the kitchen of the house on Delwood Street, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Clara was still getting ready. He could hear the quiet sounds of the morning routine from down the hall, the specific unhurried sequence of it, and he stood very still and listened to Principal Whitmore's voice come through the phone and did not let any of what he was hearing reach his face. The investigation, Whitmore said, had been completed, given the circumstances, given the information gathered, given the school's commitment to a safe learning environment for all students. Brent Holler would be suspended for 3 days effective immediately. The matter had been reviewed internally. It was the school's position that the situation had been addressed appropriately and no further formal action was being pursued at the institutional level. Marcus said, "What about the scholarship?" Whitmore paused. "That's a decision made by the awarding institution, not by—" "I know who makes the decision," Marcus said. "I'm asking what the school's recommendation is going to be." Another pause, longer this time. "The school doesn't typically comment on matters of a—" "I understand," Marcus said. He hung up. He set the phone on the counter next to the untouched coffee. He looked at the window above the sink, which faced the backyard, a small yard, mostly grass with a concrete path Clara's father had poured himself 3 years ago, so the wheelchair could move easily from the back door to the garden area where she liked to sit in summer. He had done a good job with the concrete. The edges were clean and the surface was level, and it had clearly been made by someone who cared about getting it right. Marcus stood there for a moment looking at it. Then he picked up the phone and called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Okafor. She worked in civil rights and disability law out of an office in Richmond. Marcus had found her the night before after Clara had gone to sleep, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and the methodical energy of a man who has identified a problem and is working through it systematically. He had read 3 pages of her case history before he called. He had left a message at 11 o'clock at night. She had called back at 6 in the morning. This told him something about her that the case history had not. He told her what Whitmore had said. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, 3 days and a clean scholarship. That's Conrad Holler. Marcus said, you know him. I know the school, I know the board, and I know that the athletic facility on the south end of that campus has the Holler name on it in 4-foot letters. So yes, I know him well enough. She asked a series of questions that were precise and slightly uncomfortable, the way good questions usually are. She asked about the clip. She asked about witnesses. She asked about what had been filed and when. Then she said, there was a student in that cafeteria with a phone at the wrong angle, or the right angle, depending on how you look at it. Full 47 seconds uncut. If that clip still exists on a device somewhere, we have something real. Marcus said, how do we find it? She said carefully. They made a plan. It was not a fast plan, but it was a real one. And when Marcus ended the call, he felt the particular steadiness that comes not from certainty, but from having a direction. When Clara came into the kitchen, he told her about Whitmore's call in plain terms without softening it, because she had never asked him to soften things and had in fact written to him once the year before he deployed to please always tell her the truth even when the truth was that he wasn't sure. She listened. Her hands were wrapped around her coffee mug, a ceramic one with a small chip in the handle that she refused to throw away because it had belonged to her mother. When he finished, she said, 3 days. Yes, and the scholarship is untouched. Yes. She looked at her coffee. He's going to be back in school by Friday. Yes. She sat with this for a moment, deciding how much anger she was allowed to feel and where to put it so it didn't get in the way of what needed to happen. You called a lawyer, she said, not a question. Last night, her name is Patricia Okafor. She knows the territory. Clara was quiet for another moment. Then she said, there's a kid in the cafeteria. I've seen him at the table near the window with the chess team. He had his phone out the whole time. He wasn't filming for the same reasons as everyone else. He looked scared, actually, like he was documenting it because he didn't know what else to do. Marcus looked at her. His name is Desmond Fitch, she said. He's a junior. He takes the same route to the elevator that I do. He looked at her for a long moment. How long have you known this? Since yesterday, she said. I've been thinking about who might have had the full thing. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. You're going to be terrifying when you're 30. She almost said something, then she said, call your lawyer. He called Okafor back with the name. She said she would make contact carefully through appropriate channels in a way that couldn't be traced back to pressure. She said, give her until Thursday morning. Marcus said, I have to report back by Friday at the latest. She said, you'll have something by tomorrow. He trusted her. He wasn't entirely sure why, except that she had called him back at 6 in the morning and asked the right questions, and hadn't once suggested she was more interested in the size of the case than in the outcome. He told Clara to go to school. She looked at him the way people look at a suggestion they find mildly unreasonable. I'm not hiding, she said. I know, that's why I'm telling you to go. She went. The day passed the way days pass when you are waiting slowly in the individual minutes, then all at once when you look up and realize it is evening. Clara came home at 3:15. She said the school had been strange. People looked at her differently, not worse, but altered. Some had gone out of their way to be kind in the self-conscious way of people who are aware of being observed being kind. Others had avoided her with the equally self-conscious energy of people who do not want to be associated with trouble. Brent had not been there. His 3-day suspension had started immediately. Wren Briggs had walked with her between every class. Marcus asked how Wren was. Her shoulder is bruised, Clara said. She's fine. She's angry. She has that right. She does, Clara agreed. That night after dinner, Marcus wrote out a full account of what had happened, the call from Wren, the decision to leave the drive, the school in the clear, direct language of an official report. He did not excuse himself. He did not soften the timeline. He stated what he had done and why, and what he expected the consequences to be, and he filed it through the appropriate, secure channel. Then he sat in the quiet kitchen for a while. He did not regret it. He had examined that question carefully in the small hours of the previous night, and the answer had been the same each time he arrived at it. What he felt was something more precise than regret, a clear-eyed acceptance of cost. The understanding that the choice had been real and the consequences were real, and that both things could be true at once without canceling each other. He was 30 feet from his sister. She was safe. He had put her in the position to fight back. That was the math. The math was not in doubt. The call from Patricia Okafor came at 7:40 Thursday morning. She said the clip existed. Desmond Fitch had it on his phone, full 47 seconds, unedited, timestamped. You can see everything. The provocation, the escalation, the moment of contact, all of it. Marcus said had, a pause. His mother called me at 6 this morning, Okafor said. Someone contacted them last night. She wouldn't say who, but she didn't need to. Desmond deleted the file from his device. She's withdrawing his availability as a witness. She said she's very sorry and she hopes the family is doing well and she doesn't want any trouble. Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment. She has a kid in this school. Yes. And she's afraid. Yes. He leaned his back against the wall. The wallpaper in the hallway was old and slightly faded, a pattern of small geometric shapes that had been there since before Clara's mother died, that nobody had gotten around to changing. He looked at it. What do we have left? He said. Okafor said, the truncated clip, which actually helps us in court because its existence implies the unedited version existed. Medical documentation of Clara's injuries. The school's disciplinary record, which we can subpoena. Your account and Ren Briggs's account. And the school's response time, which I think is worth examining very carefully. She paused. We can still build this case. It's slower without the clip, but it's buildable. Conrad Holler got to a 16-year-old kid's family in less than 36 hours, Marcus said. Yes, that tells us something about how far he's willing to go. It tells us everything about that, she said, which is also useful. He ended the call. He stood in the hallway for another full minute. Then he walked to the kitchen and started making breakfast because Clara would be up in 20 minutes and she would need to eat before school, and the things that needed to happen still needed to happen in the right order. He was cracking eggs when she came in. She took one look at him and said, the clip is gone. He stopped. How did you make eggs when something has gone wrong, she said. You do it to have something to do with your hands. He looked at the pan, then he told her everything. She listened the way she always listened, straight-backed hands in her lap, eyes somewhere in the middle distance. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then Desmond is a kid. He was scared before any of this happened to him. I know. I'm not angry at him. I know that too. She looked at the eggs. What do we still have? He told her what Okafor had said. She asked 2 questions, both of them sharp enough that he paused before answering each one. Then she said, okay. She ate breakfast. She went to school. The morning ground forward. It was late Thursday evening, nearly 9 o'clock, the house quiet. Clara in her room with the light still on under the door when the knock came. Not the doorbell. A knock. 3 times deliberate, with the cadence of someone who has been standing outside longer than they needed to before finally raising their hand. Marcus opened the door. The man on the front step was in his mid-50s. He wore a jacket over a button-down shirt and looked like he had not slept well in recent memory. His hands were at his sides, one of them holding a manila envelope. He stood looking at a point somewhere to Marcus's left rather than directly at him. Marcus recognized him. He had seen him twice in the school hallways over the past 2 days, moving with the slightly haunted quality of someone working hard to appear unaffected. Mr. Calloway, Marcus said. The man nodded. I need to give this to Clara. Marcus looked at the envelope. He did not step aside immediately. To her, Calloway said. Not to you, not to the lawyer. I need her to have it. Something in his voice made Marcus hold still, not a threat, not urgency, but something rawer than either. Something that sounded like a man who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has finally decided it is no longer something he can justify carrying. Marcus stepped aside. He went to the hallway and knocked on Clara's door and said quietly, there's someone here for you. She came out in her chair, still in her school clothes. She looked at the man standing on the front step, and her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. Calloway looked at her. He swallowed once. Then he held out the envelope. She took it. He did not apologize. He did not offer an explanation. He did not make any of the gestures that people make when they want the receiving of a difficult thing to also include the absolution of the person delivering it. There are 3 of them, he said. They go back 3 years. They were filed with me. I was the appropriate channel. Clara looked at the envelope in her hands. I didn't pass them on, he said. Silence. I want you to know that I understood what I was doing when I didn't, he said. I'm not going to tell you I didn't understand. That wouldn't be honest. Clara looked up at him. He held her gaze for the first time since he'd arrived. His face had the quality of a thing decided, not a thing being performed. I know what's in there, he said. The dates, the names, the details. It's all accurate. I wrote them myself. He paused. What you do with them is yours. He nodded once at her, not at Marcus, and then he turned and walked back to his car, which was parked at the curb with its engine off, and got in and drove away. Marcus closed the door. Clara opened the envelope. Inside were 3 forms, standard school incident documentation printed on Haven Ridge letterhead, each one dated and signed. The first was from 2 years ago, a student complaint about Brent Holler in the hallway near the gymnasium. The second from 18 months ago, a complaint about an incident involving someone outside the locker room who hadn't been inside it. The third from last spring. Ren Briggs' name was on the third one. Clara read all 3 without speaking. She read them the way she read everything, once quickly to understand the shape, once slowly to understand the substance. When she finished, she set them on the table and looked at them for a long moment. He kept them, she said. Yes, for 3 years. Yes. And he walked here tonight and put them in my hands. Marcus said yes. She was quiet for a while. Then he's going to lose his job over this. Probably. I'm not going to feel sorry for him. Her voice was completely level. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to feel sorry for him. I know, but I understand why he was afraid. She paused. I've been afraid of those same people in that same building for 3 years, and I have a lot less to lose than he does. Marcus sat down across from her. She said, does this change the legal picture? He said, I'll call Okafor in the morning, but yes, it does. She nodded. She put the 3 forms back in the envelope. She sat with it a moment longer. Then she said, go to sleep, Marcus. You have to drive to Fort Lejeune tomorrow. He said, I'm not leaving until, yes, you are. Not an argument, a fact. You have to be there before Saturday. If you push it past Saturday, it changes what you're facing. I looked up Article 86 on Tuesday night. He looked at her. If you're there by Saturday, it's unauthorized absence with mitigating circumstances. If you push past Saturday without authorization, it starts to look like something else. I'm not going to let that happen to you. Clara! I'm not finished, she said. I'm not asking you to abandon this. I'm asking you to trust me to carry it for a few days while you handle what you need to handle. And then come back. The board meeting is, I know when it is. I can count. She looked at him steadily. I've been handling things in this school without you for 3 years. I can handle a few more days. The silence between them was different from the silences of the past 2 days. It had more weight. The specific weight of recognition, the moment when a sibling fully grasps consciously and completely what the other has become. He said, you're going to be okay. I know. I told you that on Tuesday. Then she said, drive safe. Text me when you're there. He said, yes, ma'am. He left the next morning at 4:30. She was not awake when he left, or at least she appeared not to be, and he let her have that. He set a cup of coffee on the counter, with the maker set to keep it warm, and left a note under it, short, practical, containing both a phone number and a sentence that was neither. The sentence read, you're right, you've been handling it. I see that now. He folded the note, put it under the mug, and drove south into the dark. The house on Delwood Street was quiet behind him. The concrete path in the backyard held the first frost of the season, thin and white, beginning to melt at the edges as the morning approached. Clara arrived at school Friday morning at 7:50. Brent Holler was back after his 3-day suspension. He moved through the hallways with a slightly different quality than before, still large, still present, but something in the previous ease of his movement had been replaced by something more careful, more aware. He did not look at her directly. She did not require him to. Ren walked with her between classes. At lunch, they sat together in the corner by the east window. In the afternoon, Clara's father came home early for the first time in months. He had heard about Tuesday from a neighbor and then from the school. He came home and made dinner and sat with her at the table and asked the right questions and listened to the answers without interrupting. She was glad he was there. After he went to sleep, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. She opened fluoride.net. The cursor blinked in the text box. She had written anonymously for 2 years. She had said true things in this space that she had never said out loud in language she could not have used in any other context to 12,000 strangers who had never seen her face or known her name. It had been, in its own strange way, the most honest relationship she had outside of the one with her brother. She had thought at various points over the past 4 days about what it would mean to remove the anonymity. She had run the numbers, what it would take from her and what it might do for her. She ran them again now. Then she started typing. She did not write about Tuesday. She did not name Brent Holler or Conrad Holler or Principal Whitmore or Mr. Calloway. She did not narrate what had happened to her in the cafeteria or what the floor felt like or the sound the wheelchair made when it fell. She wrote about silence, about what it cost to maintain it, about the infrastructure required to keep quiet, the daily calibration of how much to say and to whom and when, the energy spent on performing an acceptable version of yourself in a space that has made clear the real version is inconvenient. About the way that silence maintained long enough starts to feel like protection, even when it is the opposite of protection. She wrote, "I have been silent in this building for 3 years. I want to be precise about that word. Not quiet, not patient, not choosing my battles. Silent. The kind of silent that is not a choice but a survival mechanism. The kind that you practice until you can't quite remember the difference." She wrote for 40 minutes. At the bottom, where there had always been a blank space, she typed her name. Clara Novak Jr., Haven Ridge High School, Haven Ridge, Virginia. She looked at it for a long time. Then she added one final line. "How many times does a school have to look away before it becomes the bully?" She hit publish. She closed the laptop and went to bed and did not sleep well and did not expect to. In the morning Saturday, the 5th day since Tuesday, she checked her phone at 7:15. The blog had 41 notifications. By 8, 212. By 10 past 11,000 interactions and climbing. She sat in the kitchen in her pajamas and watched the number move and felt a complicated set of things that she did not try to sort into clean categories because they weren't clean, and sorting them would have been dishonest. At noon, Ren texted Clara, "You need to look at Brent's account right now." She looked. Brent Holler's social media account had one new post. No caption, no image, no explanation of any kind. Just a share of her blog post with the link live and active from a profile with 4,000 followers. She stared at it for a long time. She turned it over in her mind from several angles and could not find one from which it became simple. It was not an apology. It was not a statement. It was something in between, something that required more information than she currently had to interpret. She set it aside in the part of her mind reserved for things that were real and important and not yet understood. What she could not set aside was the number. By 4 o'clock Saturday, 190,000 people were following a blog that had been anonymous 2 days ago, written by a girl in a wheelchair in a small Virginia town, asking a question that had not been answered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus arrived. "NJP scheduled for Tuesday. I'm okay, I saw the blog." She typed back, "You were supposed to check in when you arrived, not 2 days later." He typed back, "I know, I was handling it." She actually laughed. She set the phone down. Through the kitchen window, the backyard held the last of the afternoon light, the concrete path, the October grass gone gold at the edges. The small garden bed where she grew tomatoes in summer sat empty, now the stakes still in the ground waiting for next year. She looked at it for a while. Then she opened her laptop and began to respond to comments. There were things she needed to say, in her own voice with her own name on them. She had started something in the small hours of that Friday night that she did not fully understand yet and could not take back and was not sure she would take back if she could. She did not know what was coming on day 7. She knew only that she was tired and that underneath the tiredness, she was something she had not been in a long time. She was ready. Part 3, What Standing Looks Like. The notice arrived Sunday evening. It came by email addressed to Clara's father, and it said that the Haven Ridge High School Board of Trustees would convene a special review meeting on Monday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The subject was the incident of Tuesday, October 14th. The meeting would be held in the school's main conference room. The word that mattered most was buried in the third paragraph in the kind of passive voice institutional language used when a decision has been forced upon someone who would have preferred not to make it. The meeting, it said, would be open to the public. Clara read the email twice. Then she forwarded it to Patricia Okafor and to Marcus and to Ren in that order and set her phone face down on the nightstand. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling, the water stain in the far corner, the familiar geography of it, and she thought about what the next 24 hours required of her. Not what she wanted, not what would feel satisfying, what was actually required. She had spent 6 days watching things move around her, the clip, the suspension, the envelope, the blog, the numbers climbing. Things she had not controlled, and things she had initiated, and things that had happened in the complicated territory where other people's choices intersected with her own. She had handled what she could handle and let go of what she couldn't. Tomorrow she would walk into a room where the people who had failed her would be sitting behind a table, and the man who had orchestrated the failure would be sitting next to his lawyer, and she would have a folder with 3 envelopes in it and a name on a blog that now had more followers than the population of the county. And none of that would matter at all if she could not stand up in that room and say the true thing in the true way. She thought about something her brother had said to her years ago when she was 12, and he was about to leave for basic training, and she had asked him if he was afraid. He had said afraid and ready are not opposites. They're just two different ways of paying attention. She looked at the water stain until the room around it went dark. She slept. The Monday morning was cold in the way of October, when it has made up its mind, the air sharp at the edges, the light thin and flat. Clara arrived at school at 7:50. The day was a kind of waiting, and she moved through it with the deliberate conserving energy of someone preparing for a thing they cannot rush. Her father had offered to take the afternoon off. She had thanked him and said, "There will be other things I need from you after this, and I'd rather you save the time for those." He had looked at her for a long moment and nodded and gone to work. Ren walked with her between every class. At lunch, sitting in the corner by the east window, Ren said, "I want to come tonight." Clara said, "I know. I have something I need to bring." Clara looked at her. Ren had her phone on the table between them. She was not looking at it. She was looking at Clara with the expression of someone who has been deciding something for longer than they've appeared to be deciding it and has finally arrived at the end of the process. "Brent texted me on Saturday night," she said. Clara went still. "He sent me a file," Ren said. "He didn't say anything, just the file." Clara looked at the phone on the table. "It's 47 seconds, Ren said. The cafeteria moved around them, Trey's voices the percussion of an ordinary lunch period on a Monday that was not ordinary at all. Clara said, "Have you watched it?" "Yes. Is it complete?" "From the beginning," Ren said. Everything. You can hear what he says before he touches the chair. You can see his hand go to the armrest. You can see me try to stop it and get pushed. All of it." Clara looked at Ren's face. There was something happening in it that she recognized, the specific quality of a person who has been waiting to do something that feels both necessary and costly, and has finally decided that the cost is acceptable. "He sent it to you," Clara said. "Not to the lawyer, not to me." "He sent it to me," Ren said. Clara thought about what it meant that Brent Holler had taken the clip that could dismantle his scholarship and his reputation and his father's carefully constructed insulation, and had sent it to the girl he had shoved into a table 6 days ago. She thought about what it meant that he had sent it without explanation, without conditions, without any of the scaffolding that people typically build around a difficult gesture in order to make it more about themselves. She did not know what to make of Brent Holler. She did not need to yet. "Bring it," she said. Ren nodded. They finished lunch without saying much else. They didn't need to. The afternoon passed. At 3:45, Clara rolled into the main conference room at Haven Ridge High School. The room held a long central table and chairs arranged around it with a row of observer seats along the near wall that had been added at the last minute. Those seats were filling, parents, some of whom Clara recognized, a woman with a press badge from the county newspaper, two men in the back who had the attentiveness of people who had come to watch rather than participate. At the far end of this table board chair, Elaine Donahue and 3 other trustees sat with folders open in front of them. Principal Whitmore was to the left, slightly apart from the trustees, with the careful body language of a man not entirely sure which side of the table he belonged on. The school's legal counsel, a compact man named Fletcher, sat at the end nearest the door. Conrad Holler was already there. He sat on the right side of the table in a chair that was technically for observers, but had been positioned with the confidence of someone who has decided that positioning is itself an argument. His lawyer, a woman in a dark jacket, sat to his left. Conrad was dressed in the specific way of men who want to appear less powerful than they are. Good suit, no tie, an expression of measured concern. He did not look at Clara when she came in. His son was not in the room. Clara positioned herself at the near end of the table across from the trustees and set her folder on the surface in front of her. She did not take out the envelopes yet. She folded her hands and looked at the board chair and waited. Ren sat 2 seats to her right in the observer row, phone in her coat pocket. Elaine Donahue opened the meeting. She was a woman in her early 60s with the bearing of someone who had chaired a great many meetings and found most of them disappointing. She read the formal purpose of the meeting in the clear, uninflected language of someone who has learned that clarity is its own form of authority. She outlined the process, named the parties, stated the board was here to receive information and determine whether the school's initial disciplinary response had been appropriate and sufficient. Conrad Holler's lawyer immediately requested that the session proceed under a limited information protocol, citing the involvement of a minor. Clara's father sitting beside her, she had not told him not to come, only not to miss work, and he had found a way to do both, said quietly without standing, "My daughter is also a minor." The board chair looked at Fletcher. Fletcher murmured something. The board chair said the session would proceed as scheduled. Conrad Holler's expression did not change. His lawyer made a note. Whitmore was asked to present the school's account. He did so in 7 minutes in the language that had clearly been prepared with the legal counsel's involvement and which covered the events of Tuesday, the way institutional language covers things accurately in the broad facts and inexactly in the ones that carried weight. The word altercation appeared 3 times. The word incident appeared 5 times. The word wheelchair did not appear at all. When Whitmore finished, the board chair asked Clara if she would like to respond. Clara said yes. She did not have notes. She had the folder, and in the folder were the 3 envelopes, and she was saving those. What she had was the weight of knowing what was true and the discipline to say it precisely. She said that on Tuesday at 11:42 in the morning, she had been pushed out of her wheelchair by a fellow student in a room full of witnesses. She said this without emphasis, the way you state the coordinates of a location. She said she had sustained a bruise on her elbow and a deeper bruise on her hip that she had not mentioned to anyone until her father came home Thursday evening and noticed her wince getting up from the table. She said that the student responsible had received a 3-day suspension and that his scholarship had not been affected. She said that she was not primarily here to discuss what had happened to her. She opened the folder. She took out the 3 envelopes and placed them on the table in front of the board chair. These are incident reports, she said, prepared by a Haven Ridge teacher and filed with him as the appropriate channel over a 3-year period. The dates are on the forms. The incidents involved the same student. The reports were never passed forward. She did not say Mr. Calloway's name. She said the teacher who prepared them delivered them to my home personally last Thursday evening. He did so, knowing what it would cost him. The board chair opened the first envelope. The room was very quiet. Conrad Holler's lawyer leaned toward him and spoke in a voice too low to hear. He did not move. The board chair read. The 3 other trustees leaned in. Fletcher read over Donahue's shoulder and straightened and said something to her that involved the word counsel. Then Conrad Holler said, "These are unverified documents from an employee who is currently under review. The board should be cautious about." "Mr. Holler," Donahue said without looking up from the paper, "you are here as an observer." He stopped. The room held a particular quality of silence after that. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention. The specific held stillness of a room full of people who have understood that something has shifted and are waiting to see what the new arrangement looks like. It was in this silence that the conference room door opened. Everyone looked. Brent Holler stood in the doorway. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a plain gray jacket, the kind of outfit people wear when they are trying not to be looked at. He was not succeeding. He was 6'2" and 17 years old, and he had for the past 6 days been moving through his life with the particular quality of someone who has done something that cannot be undone and is still deciding what to do with that fact. He looked at his father first. Not at Clara, not at the board, his father. Conrad Holler said very quietly, "Sit down." Brent looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Wren Briggs. He nodded once. Wren took her phone out of her coat pocket. Conrad Holler understood what was about to happen approximately 2 seconds before it happened. He stood up. "I have to object to the use of..." Wren pressed play. The conference room had a projector mounted on the ceiling, connected to the room's display screen at the front. Wren had asked the school's IT coordinator that morning if she could connect her phone for a presentation. The coordinator had said yes because nothing in the request had sounded unusual. The screen lit up. 47 seconds. The cafeteria. The angle from the side slightly high, the way a phone is held when someone is frightened and filming in a way they hope is not visible. The image slightly shaky but clear enough. The first 34 seconds. Brent's approach, the step into Clara's path, the words audible, specific, their content unmistakable, the arm, the tray, the pause, and then the hand on the armrest and the sound and Clara going down and Wren moving and being shoved and the room erupting around all of it. Then the last 13 seconds, the aftermath, the phones, the noise, the full 47 seconds, time-stamped, unedited. Conrad Holler was still standing. His lawyer's hand was on his arm. The board chair was looking at the screen. She looked at it for a long time after the clip ended. Then she looked at Brent Holler still in the doorway. She said, "Young man, do you want to come in and sit down?" He came in. He did not sit next to his father. He sat in the observer row 3 seats from Wren, and he put his hands on his knees and looked at the table. Conrad Holler said, "I'd like to speak to my son." "Mr. Holler," the board chair said with a patience that had gone entirely flat. "Sit down or leave the room." He sat down. He looked at his son. His son did not look back. And it was in that moment, not the clip, not the envelopes, but this specific and ordinary moment of a boy declining to look at his father, that the room understood what it was actually witnessing. Not an institutional review, something older and less manageable, a reckoning of the kind that cannot be scheduled, that finds its own moment regardless of the agenda. Clara watched Brent's face. She had thought over the past 6 days about what she felt toward him. She had examined it carefully, turning it over in different lights to see what it actually was rather than what it was supposed to be. She did not feel forgiveness. Forgiveness was a thing that required time and honesty and a conversation that had not happened. She did not feel triumph because there was nothing triumphant about looking at a 17-year-old boy who had been constructed by his circumstances as much as by his choices and watching him reckon with both at once. What she felt was something closer to recognition. The board chair asked Fletcher a question. Fletcher answered in the clipped language of a lawyer who has seen a case shift and is recalculating. The board chair turned to the trustees and they conferred in brief, quiet exchanges. It was during this recess that Clara looked toward the back of the room. In the last row of the observer seats, a man in civilian clothes sat with his hands on his knees. He was not in uniform. He had not signed in at the front desk. He had arrived during Wren's clip and had not made a sound since. He had put in the request 3 days ago, emergency family circumstance, 8 hours the minimum that made the math work. 4 hours down the meeting, 4 hours back. His CO had approved it without comment. He had walked into the conference room through a side corridor 7 minutes into the session and found the last open chair in the back row. Marcus caught her eye. He did not nod. He did not gesture. He simply held her gaze for 2 seconds the way he had across the cafeteria 8 days ago, and then looked back at the board chair. That was enough. She turned back to the table. She did not know until later that he had driven up from Lejeune at 0400 for a meeting he could not officially attend, had sat in the back of a room where his rank meant nothing and his presence meant everything, and had driven back immediately after the session concluded. 8 hours in the car. He had not told her he was coming. He had simply come. The board chair said the board would be in recess for 30 minutes, after which she would convene a closed session with the trustees. She thanked everyone for their time. She said the board would communicate its decisions to all relevant parties within 48 hours. She stood. The room began to move. Clara sat without moving, her hands in her lap, the folder on the table. Her father put his hand on her shoulder. She put her hand over his and held it there for a moment. She did not look toward the back row. She already knew it was empty. She already understood the math of it. 4 hours there, 4 hours back, 8 hours borrowed from the 45 he owed. She picked up her folder. She went home. The 48 hours passed in the way that consequential waiting always passes, dense in some moments, and thin in others, the ordinary texture of days made strange by the knowledge that something is being decided in a room you are not in. Clara went to school on Tuesday. She ate lunch with Wren. She answered emails from people who had found fluoride.net and written to her things that ranged from deeply personal to barely coherent. Marcus called Tuesday evening. His NJP hearing had been that morning. He told her in plain terms, 1 rank reduction, 45 days barracks restriction, 30 days partial pay forfeiture. The bad conduct discharge had not materialized. Mitigating circumstances had been noted in the formal record, which meant something for the long term, even if it meant little for the immediate. She said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Don't be." She said, "I am anyway." He said, "Okay." She said, "You'll get the rank back." He said, "Eventually." "I mean it." He said, "I know you do. How are you?" She told him about the board meeting, about Brent walking in, about the nod to Wren, about the 47 seconds playing on the screen in front of Conrad Holler. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Huh." She said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you see his face when he came in?" She said, "Yes." And she said, "I don't know yet. I'll tell you when I do." He said, "Okay." Neither of them tried to make it simpler than it was. The board's communication came Wednesday morning. Clara's father read it at the kitchen table while she was eating breakfast. He read it twice, then handed it to her. Brent Holler, full suspension for the remainder of the semester. Academic scholarship rescinded. The school was formally referring the matter to the county for civil review. Separately, Patricia Okafor had filed a civil complaint the previous afternoon. The complaint named the school district principal Whitmore and one private individual, Conrad Holler. It documented the edited clip, the intimidation of a minor witness, and 3 years of suppressed incident reports. It was 11 pages. Okafor had described it to Marcus as a beginning, not an ending. Conrad Holler had not responded publicly. He had declined 2 calls from the county newspaper. His name was still on the athletic building in 4-foot letters. Whether it remained there for Rivera was a matter currently before the advisory board on which he no longer sat. He had resigned that position on Monday evening before the board meeting had even concluded, not out of conscience but out of calculation. He had understood, watching Brent sit down 3 seats from Wren and not look back at him, that certain arrangements could no longer be maintained. Principal Whitmore had submitted his resignation Tuesday evening. It was accepted. Mr. Calloway had been placed on administrative review pending an investigation into the handling of the 3 prior incident reports. His fate remained unresolved, and Clara had thought about this more than she expected to. She did not want the clean story where his one act of courage canceled 3 years of silence, and she did not want the other clean story where 3 years of silence canceled the one act of courage. The truth was neither of those things. It was messier and less satisfying, and probably more accurate. She filed it in the same category as Brent, real important, not yet interpretable, requiring more time than she currently had. Brent had not returned to school. Wren had told Clara without elaboration that he had started seeing a counselor. Not court-ordered, not required by the scholarship committee, something he had arranged on his own in the 2 weeks since the board meeting. Clara received this information and held it for a day before deciding what it meant to her. It did not mean forgiveness. It did not mean resolution. It meant that a 17-year-old boy was sitting in a room with someone who would ask him the right questions, and she could acknowledge that as its own kind of beginning without having to do anything with it. Desmond Fitch was back in school that Wednesday. He moved through the hallways with the particular self-containment of someone who has made a decision and is prepared to live with it. He had called Patricia Okafor on Tuesday morning, the day after the board meeting, after watching the clip play on the conference room screen through a live stream a student had posted before anyone thought to shut it down. He had said 3 sentences. He had not needed to say more. Clara had not reached out to him and did not intend to. Some things closed on their own without requiring acknowledgement. Clara set the letter down. She ate the rest of her breakfast. Her father said, "Clara." She said, "I know." He said, "I should have." "Dad?" She looked at him. "You've been holding this house together for 4 years. I know what that costs. I'm not going to let you take blame for something you didn't do." He was a man in his mid-40s who had aged in the ways that work and loss will age a person. The lines around the eyes, the particular stillness of people who have carried too much for too long without complaining about it. She had her mother's eyes, people said. He sometimes found it difficult to look at her straight on for that reason, and for no reason he was ashamed of. He looked at her straight on now. He said, "Your mother would have." "I know," she said. "I know." He nodded. She finished her orange juice. She went to school. The assembly was held on the following Thursday. It was called in the official announcement a school community forum. Attendance was mandatory. The gymnasium was arranged with all the folding chairs from the main building and both portable classrooms, and they still weren't quite enough. Clara had been asked 3 days before if she would like to speak. The request came from Dr. Vasquez, the interim principal, a woman brought in from the district office who had the brisk, unsentimental efficiency of someone who had been handed a complicated situation and had decided the most useful thing she could do was not make it more complicated. Dr. Vasquez had asked her in person, sitting across from her in the main office, and had said, "I want to be clear that you are not obligated. This is not a performance. If you have something you want to say to the school community, I want you to have the space to say it. If you don't, or if you'd rather say it another way, that is entirely your choice." Clara had said, "I want to speak." Dr. Vasquez had said, "Good." That had been the entirety of the preparation. The gymnasium filled slowly, and then all at once. The folding chairs scraped, the sound system hummed, the smell of floor polish and school air, that specific compound of sneaker rubber and institutional cleaning product, and the warmth of too many people in a closed space settled over everything. Dr. Vasquez spoke first. She spoke briefly and well, without the kind of reassuring language that insults the people it is meant to reassure. She said what had happened. She said the school's response had been inadequate in ways the board had now formally acknowledged. She said acknowledgement was not the same as repair, and that repair was the work of longer than one assembly, and that what the school could do today was create a space for honesty and then actually be honest in it. Then she said, "Clara Novak has asked to speak." Clara rolled forward from the side of the stage. She had not written anything down. She had sat at the kitchen table 2 nights running and opened her notebook and looked at the blank page, and each time she had closed the notebook because the thing she needed to say was not the kind of thing that improved with drafting. It was the kind of thing that either came out true or didn't come out at all. She reached the center of the stage. The microphone was on a stand that had been lowered. She held it in her hands rather than using the stand because the distance felt wrong. She looked out at the gymnasium, 340-some faces looking back at her. Some she knew well. Many she knew by sight from 3 years of shared hallways. Some of them had filmed on their phones when she was on the cafeteria floor. Some had laughed. Some had done nothing, which was its own kind of action, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. She saw Wren in the 3rd row. Wren was sitting very straight the way she sat when she was trying not to cry. She saw in the back row against the far wall a man in a Marine uniform sitting with his hands on his knees. She had not known he was coming. He had not told her. He had driven 4 hours on the 8-hour pass he'd put in for 2 days ago, the same calculation as before 4 down the assembly 4 back. His CO had approved it without comment, the same CO who had noted mitigating circumstances in a formal record and who was beneath the institutional requirements of his position, a man who understood the difference between a rule broken for nothing and a rule broken for something. Marcus had walked in through the side entrance 11 minutes ago and found the last open seat in the last row. He was watching her. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back at the gymnasium. She said, "I'm not going to tell you what it felt like to be on that floor." Her voice was steady, not performed steadiness, the real kind, the kind that comes from having decided before you step into the room what you are and are not going to carry in there with you. "I'm not going to describe it for you," she said. "Not because it wasn't bad, but because I don't think the problem in this school is that people don't know things can be bad. I think the problem is something else." She paused. "There were 40 people in that cafeteria," she said. "Maybe more. I haven't counted exactly, but let's say 40. 40 people, some of whom filmed it, some of whom laughed, and some of whom did nothing. And I've thought a lot about those last ones, the ones who did nothing, because they're the ones I actually think about most." The gymnasium was very quiet. "Looking away is a choice," she said. "I know that sounds like an accusation. It is one, but it's also something I want to say to myself because I have been making the same choice for 3 years. I made myself invisible in this school because it was safer. I ate lunch alone because it was easier. I kept my head down and my mouth shut, and I got very good at performing a version of myself that didn't ask too much of the people around me." She stopped. "That was a choice too," she said, "and I'm not going to make it anymore." The gymnasium was not silent the way an empty room is silent. It was silent the way a room is silent when the people in it have stopped performing their experience of being in the room and are just in it. "I don't need to walk to stand tall," she said. "I figured that out a long time ago. But what I figured out this week, the hard way, the expensive way, is that standing tall alone isn't enough. It has never been enough. The kids who get hurt in this school and in every school aren't hurt because the world is full of Brents. There are always going to be Brents. They get hurt because the rest of us practice looking away until it becomes a reflex." She took a breath. "Stop looking away," she said. "That's it. That's all I came up here to say. I don't have a program. I don't have a petition. I just have that one thing. Stop looking away. From the person eating alone. From the thing happening in the hallway you pretend not to see. From the part of yourself that knows what the right thing is and finds a reason not to do it." She lowered the microphone. She did not say anything else. She was not sure how long the silence lasted. It was 4 seconds, Ren would tell her afterward. At the time, it felt much longer. At the time, it was the most complete quiet she had ever heard in a room full of people. Then Ren Briggs stood up, just stood. Didn't clap, didn't make a sound, stood. Then a girl in the second row, a junior named Amara, who Clara had spoken to perhaps twice in 3 years, stood. Then someone in the middle. Then someone on the far side. Then a teacher, then another. Then the sound of folding chairs scraping back one after another, the specific wooden percussion of hundreds of people deciding at nearly the same moment to do the same thing. Not out of pity. That was the thing Clara understood looking out at them. Not pity, not performance. The complicated and genuine thing that happens when a true statement lands in a room and the people in it recognize it as true, a thing rarer than it should be and more powerful than almost anything else. She looked out at them. She did not cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't, and she kept the promise, and it cost her something, and she accepted the cost. At the back of the gymnasium in the folding chair against the far wall, Marcus Novak sat with his hands on his knees. He had heard his sister say 10 sentences to a gymnasium full of people, and in those 10 sentences he had recognized something he had first seen in her when she was 8 years old, and had tried the bike with the balance modifications, and had lain on the sidewalk and looked at the sky and said with complete calm and complete seriousness, "Okay, so that's what that is." That quality. The quality of meeting reality directly without the cushion of performance or the armor of detachment. He had left a base in North Carolina for this. He had reduced his rank and his pay and his standing for this. He had been asked in a formal hearing by his commanding officer whether he had understood the consequences of his actions before he undertook them, and he had said yes, and that had been the truth. He looked at his sister. She was talking to Dr. Vasquez now, the assembly beginning to dissolve around them. She was listening to whatever Dr. Vasquez was saying with her full attention, nodding once, her hands in her lap, the microphone still loosely held in her right hand. She looked like herself, the version the blog knew, the version the school had never gotten to see until right now. He sat for another minute, then he looked at his watch. He made his way through the gymnasium against the flow of students moving out past the folding chairs and the standing teachers to the edge of the stage. Clara saw him. She said something brief to Dr. Vasquez. She rolled to the edge of the stage and down the side ramp. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "The blog, 2 years, 12,000 people. You never told me. You never asked if I was writing." He took that in. Fair. There were things he had been carrying for a week that he had not found the right words for. He was not certain the right words existed. He had spent 3 years in circumstances that required very precise language orders, reports, coordinates the specific vocabulary of consequence, and had found consistently that the most important things resisted that precision entirely. He reached forward and put his hand briefly on the top of her head, the gesture he had used since she was small, the one that meant something. He had never translated into language because translating it would have diminished it. And then he straightened. She looked up at him. He had come 4 hours on 8 hours of borrowed time, and he would carry a reduced rank and 30 days of forfeited pay and 45 days of restricted movement. And he was looking at her with the expression of a man who has run the numbers and found them not just acceptable, but correct. She said quietly, "Go be safe." He picked up his cover. He nodded once. He turned and walked out through the gymnasium's side exit. She watched the door until it had closed behind him. Then she turned back toward Ren, who was making her way over with the expression of someone who has just been through something significant and is not entirely sure what to do with themselves now. Clara said 4 seconds. Ren said, "I counted." They looked at each other for a moment. They sat together in the gymnasium as it emptied in the particular quiet of a large space vacating the chairs. The humming lights, the floor-polished smell, all of it, ordinary and present and real. Ren talked. Clara listened. Clara talked. Ren listened. The fluorescent lights hummed in their fixtures, and the October afternoon moved through the high windows at the gym's east wall. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus sat in his rental car for 3 minutes before starting the engine. He was not doing anything in particular during those 3 minutes. He was sitting in the way that people sit when they have been somewhere and done something and are taking the last few seconds of proximity before they leave. He started the car. He pulled out of the parking lot past the 2 oak trees with their cracked roots down the long drive toward the main road. At the turn before the road opened, he tapped the headlights once. Off and on, one brief pulse. He did not look back to see if she had seen it. He knew she was at the door. He had not planned to do it. He had simply known that he would, in the same wordless way that long relationships develop their own language, a vocabulary of gestures that means things neither party has ever explicitly defined. He turned onto the road and drove south. Inside the gymnasium, Clara sat by the door and looked at the space where the rental car had been. The afternoon was doing what October afternoons do, thickening toward evening, the light going amber at the edges, the temperature dropping in the particular way of the season's real beginning. The 2 oak trees threw long shadows across the empty parking lot. Somewhere a door closed. The building was almost quiet. She held the unlit microphone in her lap. She had said the thing she came to say. She had said it in her own voice with her own name on it, in a room that had not always deserved honesty from her, and to which she had given it anyway, not for the room's sake, but because the alternative, another year of careful invisibility, another year of performing an acceptable version, was no longer something she was willing to do. She did not know what came next. She knew the case was still open, the civil review pending, Mr. Calloway's situation unresolved. The blog now had 200,000 followers, and she had not yet decided what to do with that, and the decision mattered and deserved to be made carefully. She knew her brother was on a highway somewhere south of her, driving back to a base where he had been reduced 1 rank and restricted to barracks, and that she would see him again, and that when she did, there would be time for all the things that had not yet been said. She knew that none of this was over. She also knew that something had changed, not in the school, not in the outcome, not in the resolution of any specific and ongoing problem that still required addressing. Something in herself. She had been on the floor of the cafeteria 9 days ago. She was not on the floor now. Not because anyone had lifted her. Not because the right person had arrived at the right moment, though that had happened. Not because the system had corrected itself, though parts of it were beginning to. Because she had decided in the way decisions are actually made, not in one moment, but in the accumulated weight of 100 smaller moments on the cafeteria floor, and in the hallway, and at the kitchen table, and in the small hours when she typed her name at the bottom of something true, that she was finished being invisible. That was all. That was everything. Ren appeared at her shoulder. "You ready?" she said. Clara looked at the parking lot for one more moment at the space where a dark gray rental car had been at the two oak trees casting their long shadows across the cracked asphalt at the ordinary October sky, doing its ordinary October things above all of it. Then she turned. Yeah, she said. They went out through the side door, the one with the working automatic opener, and into the afternoon. The concrete of the sidewalk was cold, and the sky above the school was the deep, flat blue that belongs only to late October in Virginia, the blue of a season that has made up its mind. She rolled down the sidewalk with Wren beside her, and the air was sharp and real, and the light was going gold above the oak trees, and she did not look back at the school. She had said what she needed to say. The rest was work. She was ready to do the work.